The government shutdown continues this week with no apparent end in sight. Here to discuss the latest chaos in Washington and her new initiative on behalf of international adoption is talk radio host Laura Ingraham. And he's a culinary institution who's been teaching people to cook on PBS for decades. We travel to New Orleans to discover the true ingredients and the faith that has made Chef JOHN FOLSE an international success. And finally, are limited government and economic freedom compatible with Catholic teaching? Samuel Gregg, the author of the new book, Tea Party Catholic, believes they are. We'll explore. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We're delighted you decided to drop in. Lots to cover tonight. Laura Ingraham, Chef JOHN FOLSE, and Sam Gregg are straight ahead. As always, if you have a question or a comment about tonight's show, you can tweet them to Raymond Arroyo or drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Lots to get to. First up, the brief. News from the world over this week. In the wake of the budget impasse and the partial government shutdown, the Obama administration has refused to allow priests contracted by the government to celebrate Mass on military bases this past Sunday. The Archdiocese for the Military Services, USA, estimates that chapel doors were shuttered at approximately 50 military installations. Civilian chaplains were prevented from celebrating Mass. Active duty chaplains were not affected. General Counsel for the Archdiocese, John Schlageter, warned in an op-ed piece that it would have been illegal for civilian chaplains to minister on base during the government shutdown. Even as a volunteer, they risked being arrested for attempting to do so. Earlier this week, the Archdiocese was told that civilian priests could return to ministering. Joining us now to discuss what he encountered this past Sunday is Father Ray Leonard. He ministers at the Naval Submarine Base at Kings Bay, Georgia. Father, thank you so much for joining us. Now, you go to say Mass for the service people on Sunday, and what did you find?
They just simply informed us that there would be no Catholic services would be permitted. We had scheduled confession and Mass, and there were signs on the door saying no Catholic services until further notice.
And what was the reaction from your parishioners?
The reaction of the people was disbelief. You know, they had, this is our church. We had expected that every week we have Mass there. They see that as the place that they go and have services and have confession. And so there was a lot of anger and dismay.
Father Ray Leonard, thanks so much for bringing us up to speed and for all you do for the servicemen and women.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father. And immigration reform was front and center on the otherwise closed Capitol Mall here in Washington, D.C. On Tuesday, the Obama administration allowed the immigrants' rights rally despite the closure of the mall, its monuments and memorials. Congressional Democrats are calling on the House to pass an immigration reform package already approved by the Senate. It has the full support of President Obama.
It is in the national economic interests of the United States, and it is in keeping with our long history as a nation of immigrants that we want a vote in the House of Representatives on comprehensive immigration reform, and we want it now.
That was Senator Menendez. The Republican-led House has no plans to vote on the Senate measure. Instead, the House is considering several individual immigration reform measures. More on all of this and the latest from Washington later in the show. Meanwhile, U.S. officials said Wednesday that the Obama administration is ready to slash hundreds of millions of dollars in military and economic assistance to Egypt. The U.S. has been considering cutting aid since the Egyptian military removed the country's first democratically elected leader in June. It would be a dramatic shift for the Obama administration, which has declined to label the ouster of President Mohamed Morsi as a coup. The administration has argued that it is in the U.S. national security interest to keep aid flowing. The move follows a particularly violent weekend in Egypt as dozens of people were killed in clashes between security forces and Morsi supporters. The U.S. currently provides Egypt with $1.5 billion in aid each year. And Christian leaders in Israel are up in arms over a string of attacks on several high-profile religious sites and properties. In recent months, vandals have desecrated a Trappist monastery outside of Jerusalem, a Baptist church inside Jerusalem, an historic Protestant cemetery, and other church facilities. Police arrested 4 Israeli settlers in connection with the cemetery attack, but they were later released. A movement of young Jewish extremists is blamed for the vandalism. A spokesman for the Israeli police said it has set up a task force to combat this nationalistic motivated crime. Jerusalem's Latin patriarch Fouad Boual said authorities are not doing enough.
I'm not satisfied, really. Even when they say, sometimes they meet a very young man, 13, 14 years, to say we cannot condemn him. But go to the roots. Go to the roots, to the cause, to the school, to the education for the well-being of all our society in Jerusalem and in Israel.
Christians comprise less than 2% of the nearly 8 million people living in Israel. And a Chinese couple has offered an horrific first-hand account of the forced abortion of their son under China's one-child policy. The heartbroken parents Liu Jinwen and Zhao Guoqiang told Sky News this past week that in a pre-dawn raid, 20 officials from the Government Family Planning Commission broke down their door, dragged Liu from bed, and took her to a hospital. There, she was injected with abortion-inducing drugs. It took a day for her son to die. He was aborted 3 months before he was due.
我说还等他吗？他说好像不大等他了，不大等他了之后，哎呀，我姐就顿时我没收着我爱人就是刘玲了，我自己出去，怎么着我是一个孩子没了。
孩子，对不起，我们是有冤无分。你得烧钱好好待着，我们好好为你祈祷，你好好做人，好好投胎。
The couple opted not to tell the government of the pregnancy, instead planning to pay the statutory fine after their son was born. Liu said that 10 years ago she was forcibly sterilized after the birth of the couple's first son, but that the device must have failed. And in a new expanded role under Pope Francis, the Synod of Bishops has received its first task. The Holy Father has called an extraordinary synod of the world's bishops for October of next year. The official theme of the assembly, the pastoral challenges of the family in the context of evangelization. The synod will likely address the breakdown of marriage and family life in much of the world. The Pope has also called for a discussion of how the Church should address the pastoral needs of divorced and remarried Catholics. And several months ago, William Peter Blatty, the author and Oscar-winning screenwriter of The Exorcist, initiated a formal canonical lawsuit against Georgetown University. He appeared on the show to talk about it. That complaint contends that Georgetown has regularly flouted church teaching and discipline, depriving students of a truly Catholic education. The Archdiocese of Washington is in receipt of the petition and says it continues to work with Georgetown to strengthen its Catholic identity. In the meantime, the Blatty suit has been submitted to the Vatican's Secretary of State and the Congregations for Education and Religious. In a related programming note, William Peter Blatty of The Exorcist will be joining us on the world over on All Hallows Eve, October 31st. This month marks the 40th anniversary of the release of the landmark film. It's sure to be a fascinating discussion you will not want to miss if you dare. And speaking of horror, oh, the pain being experienced by members of Congress as a result of this government shutdown. The Hill newspaper reports that members of Congress are grousing because, can you believe it, they have to pick up and reuse their own towels at the House gym. You see, the laundry service is shut down during the government shutdown. What a sacrifice. The terror of it all. Somehow I think they'll survive. When we return, the budget showdown continues on Capitol Hill with no end in sight. Radio talk show host and Fox News contributor Laura Ingraham is here to give us her take on the inertia in D.C. and tell us about a brand new initiative she started to adopt a new attitude when it comes to international adoption. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. The government shutdown shows no sign of ending, and the Republicans in Congress and the president continue their standoff over a clean, continuing budget resolution to fund the government. With neither side willing to budge and a debt crisis looming, what can we expect? Here to put it all into perspective, and perhaps more importantly, to discuss a new project she's undertaking on behalf of hundreds, if not thousands, of Russian orphans currently in limbo due to that country's ban on international adoption. I'm joined by radio talk show host, author, Fox News contributor, and mother of 3 adopted children herself, Miss Laura Ingraham.
Hello.
Laura Ingraham.
How are you?
Great to see you. Before we talk about this important project, Let's Adopt a New Attitude, tell me, we've heard from Paul Ryan, the budget chairman of the House.
Yeah.
He had
We
this
were wondering where he was.
Yeah, well, he's
Where was
emerged
he?
in the Wall Street Journal, apparently. And he's saying, look.
Like a phoenix rising from the ashes.
Well, and he's saying a bipartisan group needs to come together and negotiate, not over Obamacare, but for common sense entitlement reform, modest entitlement reform, and Medicare means testing. Is that enough? Can the Republicans, after shutting down the government, make people forget that this was, I thought, about curtailing Obamacare's excesses?
Well, I mean, it's curious because it seems that we've been down the Social Security and Medicare proposal road before. Remember Bush's proposal to reform Social Security? Well, that went to a big, you know, that went to the old hospice chute. That was down, that went down the drain. And so Ryan, I think, he feels that Republicans aren't winning, I guess, on Obamacare, or that there's no win to be had, right? That Obama's not going to completely defund it. Obama's not going to scrap it. He said as much. It's his signature legislation. So what can you get Obama to do that will get Republicans to pull back from the cliff and Obama? Let both of them save face. Now, the idea that Obama is going to work with Paul Ryan in any meaningful way on Social Security reform, maybe they've been having little tete-a-tetes that I don't know about. Maybe that's the case. I mean, anything's possible. I don't see that. I think that's wildly optimistic. And again, it really confuses the Republican narrative, in my mind, away from common sense health care reform that is needed and scrapping Obamacare, which is desperately needed for our country.
Ryan's argument is you have Democrats willing to make cuts in these entitlement programs, and therefore there's movement there. You're not getting any movement on cutting back Obamacare or even limiting it for a year, putting it off for a year.
Manchin, you know, Senator Manchin from West Virginia was on board with the delay. And Ryan might be right to some extent. Look, I think Obama has staked out such a solid position on Obamacare, solid in his thinking. And Harry Reid has confirmed it in statement after statement. So for a Democrat to then come forward and say, you know, Harry, you know, Mr. President, I'm done with this, it's kind of hard to see that happening at this point. So I think Ryan thinks that he can come in, and he's the solutions guy, and he can shift this whole narrative in a positive way. I think it's going to be tough at this point because I think the grassroots is really exercised about Obamacare, especially with all the great, I say great, the great bad stories about Obamacare that illustrate how foolish this whole project was and how devastating it's going to be to patient-centered health care.
To say nothing about independent sovereignty and
forget it.
Conscience protections and all the...
that's all out the window.
Let's talk for a moment of that super committee. They're saying we need a super committee.
Oh, I love that.
We'll have
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious committee.
We did this in 2012.
Super commissions, ad hoc commissions, special committees, special investigations. I mean,
DC voodoo.
I mean, it is just a way for people to, I think, remove themselves from immediate responsibility and say, look, we're doing something. were meeting behind closed doors, which I don't know about any of you watching, but are you not sick of people meeting behind closed doors? Don't you want them to meet each other in the sunlight and the light shining on, the cameras there, so we can see who's cutting what deal and who's getting what for giving up this? Like, I want to know who's horse trading and what they're horse trading, because usually it ends up killing us off and helping some, so-called politically correct group. So I never liked the behind closed doors, tete-a-tetes. I don't think they accomplished
Let's talk for a moment about this new initiative you've launched.
Yes,
Let's
it's exciting.
adopt a new attitude. What is this, and where did it come from?
It's kind of a long website, isn't it? AdoptAnewattitude.com. It sounds kind of liberal, which, people pretty much know I'm not. But it's not political at all. And that's part of the reason why I really love it. And people have heard about this new ban that Russia has in place to stop any adoptions into the United States. And because I have two Russian children, I've managed to spend a lot of time in Russia, and I've seen the places firsthand. And
the orphanages.
The orphanages and institutions. And look, there's some good people who work there. There's no doubt. They do the best with what they can, what they have, and so forth. They're limited resources. But we have hundreds, Raymond, of families in the United States who've basically already started down the road, who have all but been approved to adopt, who visited the children, whose children see them as their mom and dad, and it's just stopped. And then we talk special needs kids, Down syndrome children, children who are the most vulnerable, especially in Russia, where, again, limited resources, and for whatever reason, Russians don't adopt their own children in the numbers that are needed. So this was just a great thing, because there's so many American families who, for whatever reason, didn't have luck in the domestic adoption front, or felt the calling because of family relationships or whatever to adopt from Russia, and they're out of luck.
Now, this is a ban Vladimir Putin supports. Right. The Duma passed, and you have gone out and recorded children, Russian adoptees,
here
now
in this
living
country.
in the United
Former
States.
orphans. First time they've ever spoken directly to Vladimir Putin in this video.
I want people to take a look at this, and then we'll talk about it.
Hey, Mr. Putin. Hey, Mr. Putin, you should come visit me. Hi, Mr. Putin. Hey, Mr. Putin. Hi, Mr. Putin. Hey, Mr. Putin, can you do this? Look, Mr. Putin, I have a Putin doll. I think it was really bad that Russians banned adoption.
I went to Russia, I met my child, and now I can't bring her home. When I first saw her, where we really connected, she was sitting in my lap, and she sat with her legs wrapped around my waist and put her hands on my cheeks. It's heartbreaking because I think that Oksana probably is wondering where I am. It seems very senseless.
Hey, Mr. Putin, you should let the adoption start again.
Adoption's great.
You get to be with a nice family, and you get to have nice food, and you get to have a nice bed.
We're doing great over here. Mr. Putin, come on over, I'll show you.
We're doing fine. Kids like me get really nice families. And you should come over here. I'll let you play with my Putin doll.
What has been the reaction to this? I mean, it's so powerful, particularly that mother, the families.
It's both infuriating and inspiring. Inspiring because you see these kids who came from such difficult backgrounds, and their parents who sacrificed enormously to bring them here, raise them. It's inspiring to see that. It's infuriating because you have children who've not done anything. They're pawns in some political dispute between the United States and Russia, and it's so deeply unfair, Raymond. And so both infuriating and inspiring and a little cheeky. The kids are like, come over and play baseball with me. It's fun. And you have to approach this issue in a new way. People have to have a different attitude about this. That's why I say adopt a new attitude about the wonders, not just the pro-life wonders of adoption, which are transparent, apparent to all of us, but the practical wonderment of all of this for the children and the parents. It's a win-win for everybody.
What has been the reaction to people who I imagine normally disagree with you politically?
Yeah, I have my friends and my not friends, but I got a call from Mary Landrieu. I think she wouldn't be upset if I mentioned this. A senator from Louisiana, happens to be a Democrat, and she called me, and I almost started crying, of course, because she said, Laura, I watched this, and it is so moving. And I'm getting it out to everyone I know, and thank you for doing this. And it's not about me. I just, I feel I was called to do this, and I have to do this. There's no option for me. I have to do this. This is about these children, 100,000 plus orphans stuck in Russia, and many of them would be adopted by American families, and then several hundred who are stuck, who've already basically been adopted by American families.
And the families can't pick them up.
And their human rights are violated. Some families are filing lawsuits at the International Human Rights Court in Europe to try to actually vindicate the human rights of these children who otherwise have no forever family.
Very quickly, why not focus on domestic adoption, Laura? People will ask.
It's a question that a lot of people ask. Laura, you don't care about domestic adoptions. Well, anyone who says that doesn't know all the work I've done for crisis pregnancy centers and, of course, all the pro-life work I do, which I'm so devoted to. And I 100% do. And it's so imperative that we improve adoption here, streamline it, still have the precautions and the background checks in place, but we need to do that. That's part of my overall initiative. This is the first step in a long journey that I'm going to be on to facilitate adoption here, Russia because of my own connection to Russia, and Africa, China, beyond. We have to make this easier for people, not more difficult.
What do you want people to do, having watched this video and this segment?
Believe it or not, Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev, they have Twitter accounts. We don't know who reads them, but we get involved. I'm not a lobbying organization. This is a purely charitable endeavor. But if you talk about the wonders of adoption, maybe Russian children that you've met or other children who've been adopted, the more you spread the word about that, and specifically on this issue for just right now, the more I think positive energy and inspiration that's going to come from this. And tell your elected representatives you love adoption, and whatever we can do to facilitate that here and abroad is good for us, good for our hearts, and good for the children who, again, haven't done anything wrong to deserve this.
Laura, thank you for being
Great
here.
to see you.
You can watch the video, the full video.
And with Russian subtitles, by the
Russian
way.
for all you Russian
viewers
speakers.
of EWTN.
Adoptanewattitude.com is the website, adoptanewattitude.com. Thanks for coming, Laura. When we return, he's been a culinary institution in Louisiana for well over 30 years. He's also an entrepreneur and a man of great faith. We traveled to New Orleans to talk to chef extraordinaire John Folse. When The World Over Live continues, stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest has been on the culinary scene in my native Louisiana for well over 30 years. From the time he founded Lafitte's Landing in 1978, he's carried Cajun cooking to the ends of the earth, using it to tell the story of the people who made the food what it is today. Chef John Folse is probably best known for his long-running PBS show, A Taste of Louisiana, and his Chef Folse and Company Manufacturing ships over 100 million pounds of food all over the world each year. But it is his unique vision, his sense of place, and a deeply held faith that undergirds his success. We recently caught up with Chef Folse at his new restaurant in the French Quarter, Revolution, at the Hotel Royal Sonesta. Chef, let's start with this comment of yours, and I've read it many times. You say culture is the cuisine of a people. Explain that and how that informs your particular approach to the cuisine that you are so known for.
Well, I think it's a great question, and I've always said that when people ask, why is New Orleans and why is South Louisiana so famous for its food, and the obvious answer is the people. The people are the gumbo here, as we say. You know, they come from all the nations of the world. We have 7 distinct groups that arrived here. The Native Americans, of course, here first, all the way to the Italians who came in the 1860s after the Civil War. And those 7 groups, from the French, the Spanish, the Germans, the Africans who came against their will in slavery, they all brought with them a piece of their culture, all of the great ingredients that they were known for. And through moving together in one area and combining those ingredients, those philosophies, those techniques, we have a culture and a cuisine that's unique and cannot be duplicated anywhere in the world. It is ours, and it's because of the people. So absolutely, culture is the cuisine, and cuisine is absolutely out of the culture.
Yet you have taken it, really as a cultural and cuisine ambassador of Louisiana to the world, you have attempted to do just that and done it. Taken this food, unique to this area of the world, and exported it everywhere, to Moscow, to London, I mean, you've really done that. Why is that such a passion for you?
Well, I think it is such an important story. I think it's so unique. I mean, when you think of what it took for the people to arrive here from the 1680s to the Creole period of the 1720s to the fall of the South in the Civil War, this story hadn't happened anywhere else. It's happened to a group of people that are so proud, they're so traditional, they're so full of their own culture, so proud of their traditions. Most of them were Catholic, to be honest. Most of them had the foundation of the church. And to be able to go out and tell the story after everybody thought it was only about black and red fish. Everybody thought that it was only about, and today, you know, with reality television, only about the swamp creatures. And
right.
No, it was much more about a people in their heart and their heritage and their cuisine. And I felt just compelled to go out and tell that story. And every time I told it, the eyes of the people lit up and the smiles on their faces, and they knew it was a genuine, loving story. And I just was compelled to tell it more and tell it more. And thank God to 12 countries of the world.
Yeah, I want to walk back to the very beginning here. You were born in St. James Parish. You're one of 8 children.
One of 8, right?
Tell me how that childhood and that particular area where you were born set you on this path.
Well, I was born in a trapper's cabin, and that's really interesting when people hear that. My father was a French trapper. He spoke French. His mother and father, my grandmother on both sides and grandfather spoke only French. My mother spoke French. We had a very humble, simple beginning. Our seasons of the year were dictated by the foods of the swamp floor pantry, so to speak. Our Christmas was in February. Our lifestyle was different from anything anybody saw, anybody had seen coming out of the bayous. So it instilled in us certainly a love of family, because we were all one giant family living in the same area.
Yeah.
We were dependent on each other, so it taught us about the importance of belonging to an area. It taught us about work ethic. Unfortunately, my mother died when I was 7, almost 8 years old, and left the 8 children behind, and the youngest was twins, 11 months.
Wow.
The oldest was a girl, 10, and I was, as I said, going to be 8 in July. She died in May. And my dad never remarried. So he reared all 8 of us, babies, so to speak, with the help of an African-American woman who was kind enough to come into our home raising 6 of her own children. And through that experience, learned certainly the value of work, the value of working together, the value of understanding cultural differences. It was a very humble place, but probably the greatest institution of learning that I could have come from to do what I'm doing today.
Tell me how the faith you were given at that moment shaped your life and your work.
Well,
because faith was pretty important to you all.
Faith was tremendously important to us, because again, we came from a Catholic region, and I was an altar boy at a very early age. But my mother was very, very faithful. I mean, even as a young child, I mean, kneeling around the bed saying the rosary every night was important, and we had to do it, and we had to understand why we did it. It was important that we walked to the church down the road about an hour. We had no automobiles to do Mass as altar boys. It was important to her that we understood the importance of the church and God in our lives, and she prepared us for her death. Because when she died, we had that faith. Even as young children, my dad was extremely strong. Her mother and father was extremely strong and believed so much that God's hand was in everything, that it really placed us on a firm foundation, even in these difficult times and primitive times in the life of people in America, looking at the swamps of Louisiana. And certainly when I look back from the seat I'm sitting in today, it was so necessary to be able to get me to the place I am today, and the desire to bring that message out to the world that all things are possible. And that's really my message.
Tell me about the beginnings of this journey. I know there's a lot that happens between being in Bayou country and and creating Lafitte's Landing in 1978. Tell me about that period. because that's a tough period before you hit success, when that risk is so present. You have a great line. I'm going to quote it to you. You say, risk is the tariff paid to leave the shores of predictable misery. I love that line.
Well, it's so true, and it's not only about business, it's about life.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be willing. I mean, my dad took a big risk when Mom died. Mary Fascio, that wonderful African-American woman with her 6 children who came into our home because she promised my mom she would. If anything happened to her, my mom said, would a wonderful woman like you look into these children? So absolutely, I mean, these lessons in life were very important. So absolutely, I mean, faith kind of made sure that we understood that risk was a part of everyday life,
right,
and how you approach risk and understand that it is the price you pay. You have to take that chance to go out and make something happen, and that's what we did.
And you like the thrill of, and I think from what I read, the thrill of building something new. Tell me about founding Lafitte's Landing and how that relates to this new endeavor. We're sitting here in Revolution, this new restaurant you've opened in the French Quarter. You're first in New Orleans. Tell me about that.
Well, you know, I realized early on that the real story of Louisiana food was just not being told. Everybody wanted to do French cooking, or everybody wanted, and I found myself working in a hotel in Baton Rouge as a young boy after school, and said, you know, why isn't anyone doing the sauce pecans and the Creoles and the gumbos and the jambalayas? Where are they in the restaurants of the South? This is what we eat. Why don't we see it? So I was compelled to do a restaurant that served those dishes in the place where those dishes were created. So I made the very risky move, which I didn't really realize at that time. In fact, as the quote came later because of this, that I realized that by taking the risk, no money obviously, going in and restoring an old building with my own hands and covering the chairs to sit in and using used equipment and opening the doors of a restaurant 70 miles out of any major city on the banks of the Mississippi River was a risk. But the uniqueness of the food, the authenticity of the food allowed people to want to search it out. Stories were being told about this place. And it reminded me of the fact that that's really how great things happen in life. You know, you just go out, you take that chance, you have a vision, you stick to it, you change your course along the way. But eventually, if your heart's in it and you're really committed to it, you will fail at times, but the failure just teaches you one new thing.
Well, I love the entrepreneurial spirit that you so embody, that you have this story to tell, and you tell it not only with your mouth, but with your hands and with your food. And so people are really receiving it on multiple levels. How aware were you when you started this, that you were you consciously making an effort that I'm going to tell this story through the palate and through the ear?
I'll never forget, it was a Christmas season, and I think it was like a Christmas Eve sitting around talking about why doesn't anybody know about us? And I was talking about the cuisine and the culture. I said, nothing is more interesting, exciting, more important, more historical, more cultural than this. And then somebody at the table said, well, why don't you do it? And I said, I might just do it. And really it was as simple as that, because I knew that the story was important. And of course, again, faith walked in, and there was a Japanese gentleman who walked into my restaurant and sat at a table and said he really enjoyed the meal, and he said, I think I would like to have this in Japan. And just out of the blue, with no indication whatsoever that this gentleman was one of the top hoteliers in Japan. He owned the largest polo company in the East. And he ate the food at Lafitte's Landing, very simple food, and said, we need to bring this. Would you come do a restaurant for just a temporary restaurant to showcase American cooking? Because he says it's very important in the world now. This was in the 1980s. And I said, Japan? Wow, are you kidding me? So I had my opportunity to bring my first story of Louisiana cooking and her people to Japan, and had a stage to do it on, and that lit the fire in my belly about this is fabulous. Look at the people, how excited they are to eat the cuisine. And of course, they knew New Orleans, they knew Mardi Gras, they knew the song Jambalaya, Crawfish Pie, they knew jazz. They knew enough to know that they wanted to come and taste it. And that was enough for me to know it could happen.
And could happen all around the world.
Could happen all over the world. Then I decided, well, why not do it in countries where people will never have the opportunity to eat it? What about Russia? What about China? Being too naive to know that was impossible, and since I was so naive to know it, I made it happen.
You did it. That's the best kind of naivete, right?
I didn't know you couldn't do it.
And then you had a great historic moment in 1989. You were the first non-Italian, with apologies to my paisans, the first non-Italian to create a meal at a Vatican State dinner.
The Vatican State
Tell me
dinner.
about that moment.
That was another gift from God. I mean, really, our bishop, Bishop Ott, at the time, Stanley Ott, had asked me to create a dinner for the Holy Father coming to New Orleans. And so I came in and created this beautiful idea of having 7 nations, beginning with Native American and going all the way through to Italian, each to create a course to represent the cultures of Louisiana. And this is what makes America in our region what America is all about, the Cajun and Creole culture, this multitude of people coming together, and let each one of them showcase the foods of their culture. And we did it, and then I got a visit from Bishop Ott saying, we're having a little trouble. The great restaurants in New Orleans really wants to do this dinner. And I said, well, okay. And I said, but you know, Bishop, I said, they're probably right. I said, if you were bringing all New Orleans chefs to Donaldsonville, where I am, I would be offended. I said, so I understand it perfectly well. I said, I tell you what, why don't I just back away and just let the chefs in New Orleans have their time with the Holy Father. It's right for them to do it. And he said, I'll never forget, and I just love Bishop Ott, and he looked me right in the eyes and he said, I promise you, you will do a dinner for the Vatican. And I said, well, if it happens, it happens. And a couple of years later, he called me one day and he said, well, remember that promise I made you? He said,
this is the day.
This is the day. And I said, well, when is the Pope coming? He says, he's not, you're going. So then, of course, I went over to Rome and did the Vatican State dinner, which was absolutely incredible. And again, as I say, just a gift from God saying, thank you for doing what was right back then, even though, of course, I was really anxious to do it.
And I understand he was a fan of your gumbo.
He was a big fan of the gumbo.
Which you would, did you start sending it over?
Which I did. I sent gumbo twice through LEONARD da Vinci because he mentioned the fact that he had loved the soup, that when he came to New Orleans, he loved the gumbo soup. And I said, well, I can certainly get some to you. And he said, is it possible? I said, it's possible.
What are they missing in the cuisine today in America?
Well, I think it's so unfortunate that chefs today are following the theme of fame. And everybody wants to be famous, and to be famous, let me try the next trick, and let me try to see what might work. That's what this guy is doing. Let me see if I can borrow from it. Yeah. When in fact, they're missing the most important thing. Where did you come from? Where does your heart lie? What's your heritage? Did your family come here as immigrants from Alsace-Lorraine? Then what was the food of that region? That's what your grandfathers and grandmothers brought here. Market your uniqueness. Market your uniqueness. Why do you want to be what I am, or why would I want to be what you are? Look deep into your heart and forget about everything else, because therein lies your creativity. And I think that's what's missing in America today, just looking into your heart rather than trying to chase the fad.
Well, you said it earlier, and there's a wonderful quote I read about being true to your heart and soul, being true to who you are. That is really what this, not only the architecture of this building, but also what you serve on the plates here. Tell me about this restaurant and how it is sort of a culmination of your career and your philosophy.
This restaurant definitely is kind of the storybook of my life, because really you cannot come to New Orleans to create good food. There's too much good food in New Orleans. You cannot come here to be a great restaurateur. There's too many great restaurateurs. I mean, the Brennan family, and I could go on and on about the great chefs here. So what was missing to me in New Orleans was exactly what we're talking about. The cuisine that really showcases the cultures. How can we put onto the table a corn and shrimp soup and tell the story of the Native Americans? Because they gave us the corn from Mesoamerica. They gave us the beautiful crawfish and shrimp from the swamplands? What about these slow braised dishes that were brought over here by the French in the 1600s? Who's telling that story today? How are we keeping our culture alive on the table? And how do we train our staff to buy into it and really get excited about the uniqueness of this restaurant? Telling the story of the people and the food they created.
Just walking through Revolution is to dive into the culture of the region. From its indigo-stained carriage house bar to the blown glass vegetables and fruits of Louisiana on each table, Revolution is a constant reminder of the bounty of this area. On the walls of the central dining room is a mural depicting the people who contributed to this unique cuisine, each bringing something all their own. And then, of course, there's the food. And when barbecue shrimp and grits are on the menu, who can resist?
Grab
Here, I'm gonna use my fingers. You gotta use your fingers. It's New Orleans.
Good.
Oh,
look this. Look, and I dip mine in the grits.
You know how to do it. This is spectacular. Can we just sit here for the rest of the day?
Absolutely. So every time someone sits at these tables, we want them to know that when they stick their spoon into that cup of turtle soup, the recipe is written on the wall so they can see it, but that it was designed in 1822, and the English were fighting against the French, and the English brought the turtle soup, and the French made it what it is today. We want the people to know how that turtle soup got to the plate today. That's what the restaurant is all about. We want people to walk out here saying, wow, I had no idea that's where our food came from. It's about the people, and that's what this whole restaurant is about, a recreation of the living stories, basically, of how our food developed over the centuries.
Each year, Chef Folse hosts a Dining by Design dinner. It raises hundreds of thousands of dollars for the Cypress Springs Mercedarian Prayer Center, a healing and prayer ministry run by Sister Dulce Marie and her nuns in Baton Rouge. Chefs come from around the country to help Chef Folse, donating their time and talents to this great cause.
And these chefs are coming from California and New York. They don't know Sister, but the minute they get here, they get to meet her, and then they become a part of the ministry. They always come back every year. I have chefs who come every year. We hope to raise. I think we're going to raise in excess over the 4 years so far, almost $1 million. We're going to raise hopefully another $250,000 to $300,000 this year. All proceeds, every dime, going to the cost of operation of this growing center and filling the needs of the people who come to see Sister, mainly sick and dying. And they have a place where I think God has sent her to establish a place where she tells me all the time, Papa said, I'll go to Louisiana, my people love me there.
So what is next for John Folse? What's the next thing on your agenda? What are you seeing? What do you still want to do?
Well, you know, I'll never forget the day we buried Mom. I was a kid, right?
7, yeah.
And Dad gathered us all around this big old feather bed, and we had just gotten back from the graveyard, and he kind of put his hands around all of us, and he says, you know, I know y'all worried, but I'm not going to split up this family. I'm going to keep it together, but we're all going to have to work really hard to keep our family together. And when I think of the greatest challenges in my life, and I think of the direction I'm going to go in, I just remember that moment when it became so clear that all we had to do was stick together. All we had to do was work hard together, stick to the mission, understand the challenges, and know full well that we weren't alone. And the future was going to just unfold beautifully for us. So where do we go from here? Knowing what's happened to me in the last 30 years, all I can say is I don't have a clue, but it's going to be great.
I love that answer. Thank you so much, Chef Folse. It is a joy to be with you and to be in this beautiful restaurant. Chef Folse has started a new expanded culinary school at Nicholls State University so he can pass his culinary gifts to the next generation. For more on Chef Folse and Revolution, go to jfolse.com. When we return, We'll talk about how Catholic social teaching and free market economics are not such strange bedfellows, or are they? Research director of the Acton Institute and author of the new book, Tea Party Catholic, Sam Gregg is here to enlighten us when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. As the battle over budgets and fiscal responsibility rages in D.C., Catholic social teaching is often invoked. Is it moral to cut benefits to the needy even when funds are tight? Is this government shutdown moral? Is the concept of limited government and economic liberty somehow at odds with church teaching? My next guest has examined the question in his new book, Tea Party Catholic, The Catholic Case for Limited Government, a Free Economy, and Human Flourishing. He's also the research director at the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. Please welcome Sam Gregg to the program. Sam, why title this book Tea Party Catholic? There are a lot of people who take a very dim view of Tea Party. It has a political connotation. And to conflate that with Catholicism, some say, you're dividing people in the church.
Well, the book itself has very little to do with the Tea Party movement. In fact, I say that right at the beginning. What the book is about is talking about the American experiment in ordered liberty, and I use the phrase Tea Party because it harks back to things that Americans resonate with, things like the Boston Tea Party, the American Revolution, the American experiment. But the Catholic part is about showing how Catholics were, first of all, very involved in the American Revolution, much more than most people realize, that they were involved in shaping the American experience and the American experiment as we know it today. But it's also talking about how Catholics can inject some new ideas into ideas about limited government, about economic liberty, about religious freedom, which, of course, some people would say are three things that are under enormous stress today. So that's really the essence of the book, to get to this connection between the American experiment and Catholicism. And I think that's something that Catholics generally need to talk more about.
Early on, you invoked Charles Carroll, the
Yes.
only Catholic signatory to the Declaration of Independence. What was his attitude about markets and economic liberty? And what are we missing there in that very early Catholic example, if you will, of someone at the founding?
Well, what most people don't know is that he was, at the time, the wealthiest American in the United States. So financially speaking, he had a lot to lose if the revolution had gone south.
Didn't work, yeah.
It didn't work out. He was in big trouble. But more importantly, he had a view of the nature of government. He had very clear economic views, which we would describe today as more or less pro-market. But more importantly, I think, he had a vision of what this new republic was going to be about. And he saw it as one of an empire. He used the phrase empire of liberty. And what he meant by that was a society in which freedom, properly understood, would flourish. And his understanding of freedom wasn't autonomy for the sake of autonomy or liberty for the sake of liberty. He had a very rich conception, a Catholic conception of what freedom is about. And ultimately, freedom for Catholics is about excellence. So he would use language like the Republic of Virtue to describe his vision of what he thought America would be like. And that's very important language because lots of other founders use that same type of language as well.
Now, you draw out this connection between economic liberty and religious freedom, something that we're hearing a great deal about today, heard about earlier in the show. Draw that out a bit for us, and then I want to get to some who might take a contrary view.
Sure.
To Sam Gregg. Go ahead.
Well, when it comes to the connection between economic and religious liberty, I think today, with the expansion of government into the economy, we're seeing that when you diminish liberty in one sphere of life, it tends to have negative implications, sometimes intended, sometimes unintended, for other forms of liberty. So if you expand the welfare state, as we've seen happen over the past, well, let's say 8 years, and you have a welfare state that has a vision of the human person that's quite antithetical to the Catholic vision of the person. So today's welfare state, I think, is very much based upon a type of view of the person as a rather hedonistic being, as someone who needs to be taken care of, someone who's driven by desires rather than reason. And when that comes into a clash with what people believe as a matter of religious faith to be true, then you've got religious liberty effectively being crowded out by a growing welfare state. But it's not just an intellectual crowding out, it's also a practical one as well, because the welfare state consumes resources and it takes up space that used to be occupied by many religious associations. So in other words, religious liberty isn't just about my right and your right to exercise our conscience. It's also about the freedoms of religious communities, which Dignitatis Humanae specifically talks about. So I think that's part of the problem. And it's not just literally things like Obamacare, it's also things like when Catholic organizations start taking large amounts of money from the government. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that the priorities of the organization, even if it's staffed by very good Catholic people, can often start shifting away from the people they're trying to help and much more upon how do I get
secure that grant? Yeah, securing that grant. I want to put a few things before you. When people heard you were coming on, I was inundated with emails, and one of them contained the following quote. Now, this is Pope Francis. He said this when he was in Sardinia in September. "We don't want this globalized economic system, which does us so much harm. Men and women have to be at the center of an economic system as God wants, not money. The world has become an idolater of this God called money. It is not a problem of Italy and Europe. It is the consequence of a world choice of an economic system that brings about this tragedy, an economic system that has at its center an idol, which is called money." He seems to be condemning profit and a profit-focused market. Your response?
Well, I think there's several things that are going on in that statement. First of all, I think he's reflecting the experience of many Latin Americans of globalization, which has not been in some cases a very happy experience. He comes from Argentina, which of course went through a huge financial meltdown back in 2001. He's also reflecting, I think, genuine distress that you find in countries of Europe where you have enormously high youth unemployment rates, for example. But the question is, has globalization helped the poor overall, or has it hurt them? Now, if you look at a region like East Asia, something like 850 million people have escaped poverty. 850 million people. That's a lot of people. Why? Because they've integrated themselves into the global economy. So I think many of the countries that he's probably referring to, such as in Latin America and in Europe, they are experiencing what happens when you globalize an economy. Things get more competitive. You have to work harder. You can't have big welfare states like we used to have anymore. So I think these are internal things that, frankly, many countries in Latin America and Western Europe simply aren't willing to adjust to. And as a consequence, they're starting to pay a price for it.
Let's talk for a moment about Pope Benedict. His encyclical in 2009 on charity. And he said, "A true world political authority is needed to oversee the economy and work for the common good." Now, that is clearly an outside international entity imposing its will on free economies. How does that square with the philosophy you're advancing?
Well, of course, it doesn't square in some senses, because I think that much depends upon what you mean by a world authority. And if you look at that encyclical, you find that he's very, very careful when it comes to defining what exactly he means by a world authority. And in fact, I think it was back in 2012, he made some comments basically saying that it could mean, doesn't necessarily have to be a coercive body. It can be a body, he said, ruled by reason, in which people came together to make collective decisions about things. So I think a lot depends on what is cashed out by what we mean by world authority. We have international institutions right now. We have the United Nations, we have the IMF, we have the World Bank, which already assume a certain degree of influence over the global economy. But here's the problem. The problem is that a centralized world authority simply could not know enough about what's going on in the global economy at any one point in time to be able to make anything but the broadest decisions possible about what goes on in the
So you're
economy.
suggesting that supposition, that idea advanced by the Pope violates subsidiarity?
Well, he goes on and says in that very same encyclical, he says now this world authority would have to operate according to the principle of subsidiarity because he knows, I mean, he's from a person who grew up in Nazi Germany. He knows what centralized power looks like. He's also been someone who, especially before he became Pope, was rather critical of certain aspects of the European Union and some of its centralizing tendencies. So I think both popes actually, when it comes down to it, when it comes to the very concrete, detailed things, when it comes to economic policy or monetary policy, both of them have said, including Pope Francis, that this is primarily a responsibility of lay people, and that lay people, to a certain extent, are free to legitimately disagree about these sorts of issues. And I'm hoping that this book, Tea Party Catholic, will stimulate some debate about some things that I think maybe haven't been debated enough within the church.
We are in the midst of a shutdown here in Washington, D.C.
I noticed.
And yeah, both parties are grappling with the financial reality hitting home. You have an entitlement state that has exploded. They simply don't have the revenue to continue at this pace. And you've got a healthcare regime that now has entered the picture. Every time, these arguments begin on Capitol Hill, no doubt, Catholics come to the fore. Half of them say we've got to be fiscally responsible. We must cut away at these entitlement programs. And then another group of Catholics, you call them social justice Catholics in your book, they come up and say, wait a minute, that's immoral. You are hurting the needy and the poorest of the poor. Your message to them in the middle of this showdown, is it moral to make those sorts of draconian cuts in some instances?
Well, you know, I think a lot would depend upon which particular programs we're talking about, who would affect. But here's the thing. It seems to me that it's much more consistent with the founding, the American founding with the American experiment, that when it comes to helping those in need, our first recourse should not be the government. It should be individuals, it should be families, it should be religious associations, it should be churches. When Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote that great book, Democracy in America, came here in the 19th century, he observed that when it came to helping problems, helping people get out of their problems, it was religious associations and individuals did it, not governments. And maybe that's something that we need to be thinking about. Instead of expecting governments to take care of so many of these problems for us, maybe it's time for us as a church to be saying, no, that's something that we Christians need to be doing. In fact, Benedict XVI was very clear about this in a number of his encyclicals, that there's something that the welfare state can't give people. It's called loving personal concern. Welfare states can't do that. And there are situations, he said, of extreme need that cry out, not for another welfare payment, but for loving personal concern.
So you would say those cuts to some of those entitlement programs are moral?
I would need to know which ones we're talking about and how far the cuts go.
Very good. Sam Gregg, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
And the book is Tea Party Catholic, The Catholic Case for Limited Government, a Free Economy, and Human Flourishing. You can get it at bookstores everywhere and online. You can read Sam Gregg's columns at acton.org. That is all the time we have. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. The links are at raymondarroyo.com. By the way, if you sign up for my free e-blast, I'll send you exclusive content each week. You can sign up at the center of the page, raymondarroyo.com. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. See you next time. Bye now.